Iniciamos, nesse momento, a sessão da palestra magna com a presença da doutora Júlia Paranhos como moderadora, que apresentará a palestrante, doutora Ellen Toll. Perguntas poderão ser formuladas pelo chat e serão respondidas ao final da palestra, na sessão de debate. Passo a palavra à moderadora desta mesa, doutora Júlia Paranhos, professora associada, coordenadora do Grupo de Economia da Inovação do Instituto de Economia da UFRJ e membro da Associação Brasileira de Economia Industrial e Inovação, que fará a apresentação da palestra internacional. Doutora Ellen Toll.
Obrigada, Alexandre. Bom dia. Eu vou falar em inglês para apresentar a Ellen, para ela poder nos acompanhar. Good morning. Our speaker today is Dr. Ellen Toen. She's the Director of Medicine's Law and Policy, a group of legal and policy experts offering advice to international organizations and governments. She is the founder and former executive director of the Medicine's Patent Pool. She is a Global Health Law Fellow at the Law Faculty of University of Groningen. She has a master's degree in law from the University of Amsterdam and a PhD from the University of Groningen. She has published widely and is the author of several books. In 2017, she received the Prix Prescrit for her latest book, Private Patents and Public Health, Changing Intellectual Property Rules for Public Health. In 2020, she was appointed Officer of the Order of Orani-Nassau, a royal award given in recognition of her work on access to medicines. Ellen will make a 40-minute presentation about the European developments with regards to pharmaceutical monopolies and the challenge this poses. After that, we'll have about 30 minutes to ask questions for Ellen. Please use the chat to send your questions. I would like to thank Ellen to be here with us today. Ellen, the floor is yours.
Obrigada, Julia. Bom dia. Thank you very much. It is lovely to be with you, although I cannot stress enough how much more I would enjoy to actually physically be with you in Brazil, which is a country I absolutely adore, and my husband and I regularly try to spend actually as much time as we can. But this year, for obvious reasons, we meet on Zoom and not in Rio de Janeiro. I have prepared a few slides which I will share with you. Let me try to can you see the slides?
Yes.
Yeah?
Yes, now it's,
Okay. You see the slideshow, or do you see the two slides on the screen?
The slideshow.
The slideshow. Okay, good. Excellent. I was asked to speak to you about the rise of levels of intellectual property protection in Europe, the European experience, and I will do that at the using this overview, because if you look at pharmaceutical intellectual property protection in a way in Europe and in some other countries also, that comes to you through various legal means. There is the patent framework that comes through the laws that regulate the intellectual property, in particular the Patents Act, and then there are various types of exclusivity that actually derive from the medicines legislation. Now, you are probably most familiar with patents. That is represented here in this box with the yellow line, which represents the 20-year minimum patent term, which is since the establishment of the TRIPS agreement of course, compulsory for all members of the World Trade Organization. And as you know, a patent is the right to exclude others from using your invention. The thinking behind the patent system is that it encourages innovation. That is why we have a patent system. The rights are granted by national, or in some cases regional, authorities for a minimum, as I said, of 20 years upon application. Patents are national. International patents don't exist. There's all kinds of international regulation, but the patents are national, and I stress that because later in my presentation you will see that has consequences, particularly in the European Union. Now, patent law has public interest safeguards. It is meant to provide benefits for society as a whole, not only to the right holders, and therefore governments can also intervene if those benefits do not emerge, or if those benefits emerge under conditions that a society can actually not afford. Compulsory licensing, meaning giving others than the patent holder the rights to use the innovation, is one example of that. Now, the European Union also has a system of supplementary protection certificate. It is not a patent extension per se, but it offers up to 5 years of patent-like protection to a registered medicine. And again, it is to compensate for the lack of commercial exploitation during the medicine's regulatory approval, and it is meant to increase, that is one of the official purposes of this piece of legislation, it is meant to increase pharmaceutical research and development in the European Union. And it assures 15 years of effective patent protection, and is deemed necessary to cover the investments put into the research. The cost of this system to society are significant. A recent study, which was commissioned by the government of the Netherlands, found that the total cost of the supplementary protection certificates for these three drugs were estimated to have been between 120 to 660 million per medicine. So that is quite significant, particularly since our healthcare systems financially are getting increasingly stretched. Now, the SPCs are granted at the national level because they are linked to patents. There is no European-wide patent. There's a European Patent Office, there's a European way of European system for granting patents, but the patents then fall into national patents, and the status of these patents may differ per country. Also, the decision to grant or not to grant a supplementary protection certificate can differ per EU member state. And here you see the consequences of that. This concerns a medicine used in the treatment and the prevention of HIV. This is tenofovir combined with emtricitabine. It's known under the trade name Truvada. Now, the Netherlands never granted this supplementary protection certificate, and the price of this medicine in 2018 was around 48 euros. It's actually today a bit less, it's €1 a day. But in other countries where this protection was in force, you see that the prices are significantly higher, with Denmark as which had the highest price. In these countries, only the originator, Gilead, could be on the market with this medicine. In other countries, generic competitors were active, and that drove the price down fairly rapidly. It's important to realize that the actual production cost of this medicine is around €5, or less, is actually less than €5. So the profit margins are quite significant as a result of these protection mechanisms. Now, another form of exclusivity comes in the form of data exclusivity. And here you see in this sort of pink red box, these are the provisions, the various exclusivities that come through the medicines regulatory system. So data exclusivity is not something you find in patent law, but you find in the medicines law. in the European Union in the pharmaceutical legislation. It was introduced in the European Union in 1987. It was originally 6 years for small molecules and 10 years for biologics. In 2004, the EU regulation was, was amended and the exclusivity regime expanded to what became known as the 8+2+1 rule, which means 8 years of data exclusivity. And that means that during that period, a generic manufacturer cannot apply for marketing authorization with reference to the clinical efficacy test data of the originator company. And then there is a 2+1 year of market exclusivity, during which period a generic manufacturer can apply for marketing authorization but cannot actually market the product yet. So this again offers a period of market exclusivity during which competitors cannot be active. Data exclusivity does not require an application such as a patent. You have to apply for a patent and fulfill certain conditions. It is granted regardless of the level of investment. It is the justification, again, is the protection of the investment of the development of the data necessary to apply for marketing authorization, but it is then granted without actually checking how significant that investment has been. And it is quietly enforced through the medicines regulation. You don't actually, as the rights holder, you don't actually have to do anything. Important to realize that there's no international obligation to provide data exclusivity. The World Trade Organization's TRIPS agreement, Article 39.3, talks about the protection of certain kinds of data related to new chemical entities against unfair commercial use, but it does not contain the obligation to create an additional layer of market exclusivity. The majority of WTO members do not provide data exclusivity. The EU generally requires data exclusivity commitments in free trade agreements, and that certainly has consequences for countries that engage with the EU on this. In the EU at the moment, there is quite a bit of discussion about the fact that data exclusivity can hamper the effective use of compulsory licensing by EU member states. It may not come as a surprise that countries are looking more closely today at their compulsory licensing legislation to be sure to be able to use compulsory licensing in the context of the COVID-19 pandemic. If new products, it could be medicines or vaccines or diagnostic tools become available, but are not available in sufficient amount or are not available under the right conditions, governments want to be able to intervene. Germany, for example, has recently amended its patent law to enable the Minister of Health to issue compulsory licenses during the pandemic. But a serious problem is the data exclusivity, because you may be able to lift the patent barrier to generic entry. But if then the generic manufacturer cannot apply for a marketing authorization because of data exclusivity, the effect of a compulsory license, of course, will not happen. The compulsory license will remain without effect. So there is a discussion today about the need to introduce a waiver. Such a waiver does not exist in the pharmaceutical legislation. There is one piece of legislation in the EU where such a waiver does exist, and that is the EU regulation on compulsory licensing of patents for the manufacture of pharmaceutical products for exports outside the European Union. There is that piece of legislation contains a waiver to data exclusivity, and in fact that waiver should, in our view, also be included in general medicines legislation. Now, I mentioned that data exclusivity is one of the demands in trade relations by the European Union. The Ukraine has had some experience with that. Ukraine agreed to introduce 5 years of data exclusivity as a result of a trade agreement with the European Union. And as a result, an essential medicine used for the treatment of viral hepatitis C, had to be withdrawn. A generic manufacturer had applied and obtained marketing approval, but the originator company, Gilead, took action to persuade the Ukraine government to revoke this marketing authorization, and with reference to the data exclusivity and additional legal pressures, including the threat of an investor-state dispute, Ukraine indeed moved to revoke. Farco was the generic company, Farco's marketing authorization. Just to say that these data exclusivity rules do not remain without consequences. Another layer of exclusivity can be found in the orphan medicines regulation, and you see here in the slide it is represented again. This comes through medicines regulation, the specific orphan drug regulation, which provides 10 years of market exclusivity for an orphan indication. It is possible to have multiple orphan indications per product. So again, these are exclusivities that can be stacked and can be further expanded in the case of the development of a pediatric indication. The Orphan Medicinal Products Regulation targets diseases that affect small patient populations, so 5 or less patients per 10,000 of population. It's estimated that there are at least 8,000 such rare diseases, and that 30 million EU citizens are affected. And the regulation offers a mix of push and pull incentives, such as protocol assistance in the development of the products, fee waivers for the registration of the product, a framework for additional EU funding for the development of medicines, and then the 10-year market exclusivity, which is, of course, the cherry on the cake. In order to obtain an orphan drug designation for your product, you have to either demonstrate that the prevalence is not more than 5 per 10,000. That is called the prevalence route. There's also a return on investment route, which requires you can then target a patient population that is higher than 5 per 10,000, but you have to show that past and expected future development, production, and marketing cost, including grants, tax incentives received, and an estimated justification for the expected future revenues. You actually have to open the books. So that route exists, but that requires transparency as to the cost of the development of the product. You actually have to demonstrate that there isn't sufficient return on investment. As a result, that route has hardly ever been used. It has, in the history of this regulation, has only been used once, and that was subsequently withdrawn. So there's almost no experience with the return on investment route for obtaining an orphan drug designation. The 10-year market exclusivity means that no similar product can be applied or approved for marketing during a period of 10 years. This is regardless of the patent status or other forms of exclusivity. So this actually comes with a fairly strong exclusivity right. The exception to this is if the orphan medicine holder authorizes the registration of another product if there is insufficient supply of the orphan medicine, and if a similar medicine is safer and more effective or otherwise clinically superior. In the original draft of the orphan drug legislation, the European Commission had proposed to have a withdrawal clause, to offer member states the possibility to withdraw the market exclusivity should the criteria for an orphan drug no longer exist or unreasonable profit from the prices charged. But somewhere in the process of lawmaking, that withdrawal clause got lost and did not survive the lawmaking, which means that this piece of legislation came into force without the necessary safety valves. In recent years, we've seen a number of problems with the Orphan Drug Act, which has led to calls from policymakers for a review and revision of the legislation. I'll give you one example of what can happen when companies decide to game the Orphan Drug Act. This concerns a drug, CDCA, which was in the past a prescription medicine for the treatment of gallstones. Now, the treatment of gallstones has changed. Medicinal products are no longer used for that. But in the meantime, it became an off-label treatment for a rare metabolic disease. It costs 308 euros per patient per year, and physicians that treated those patients prescribed the product for this price, off-label. So it didn't have an official indication. It wasn't registered by the European Medicines Agency, for example, for that purpose. It was just medical practice, and this product was used for years. Then the company Leadiant appeared, and it obtained marketing rights for this product by registering it. And then subsequently it withdrew the product from the market. It also bought up production of the API and finished product throughout the European Union. Then in 2004, it obtained orphan drug designation based on the presentation of two small trials they actually had not carried out themselves. But as a result, they became the sole supplier. They obtained a 10-year market exclusivity that comes with an orphan drug designation, and they increased the price from 308 to 158,000 per patient per year. At which point, the Netherlands, for example, said, the reimbursement authority said, we're not going to pay for this. This is an outrageous price for a product that is already used in clinical practice, and hospital pharmacists started to make it in-house, which apparently was possible, and offered it at a much lower price. The company, of course, took action. Then the hospital pharmacists had to stop doing that. In the end, they did get the blessing from the government, and they're back making these products. But this is something that is quite extraordinary, but absolutely legal. This happens within the existing legal frameworks. The other issue with the Orphan Drug Act is the pursuit of what some have started to call niche busters. So from a blockbuster drug go to a niche buster drug, whereby products that benefit from orphan drug incentives actually become blockbuster drugs, really meaning medicines that sell that have sale figures of over 1 billion euros per year. Now, in 2009, only 3 of such orphan designation drugs existed, while in 2020, 20 of such drugs existed. And you see the list here, and you will notice that a number of them are indeed targeting very rare diseases, but others are targeting, for example, cancer. A number of cancer drugs on this list. Now, these are clearly medicines that do very well from a commercial point of view, and do not really need all the additional incentives and exclusivities that are granted through the orphan drug regulation. But again, this is what the law provides. Now, in recognizing these problems, but also recognizing that the rising cost of these medicines is an increasing burden on the healthcare systems, the European Union Council decided, that should have been 2016, decided in 2016 to review the pharmaceutical incentive system. A number of studies have been published in the meantime, looking at, do these regulations actually fulfill, do they meet their objectives? Do they do what they were supposed to be doing? Most of these studies come to the conclusion that that is not really the case. The European Union at the moment is developing a new pharmaceutical strategy that seems to open the door for legislative changes. But I must say that progress is really very slow. Here are some of the findings of the pharmaceutical incentives review, which were, for example, one of the stated objectives is to stimulate the European industry and attract industry to the European Union. That was one of the objectives of the Supplementary Protection Certificate. But of course, whether a company is based in the United States or in Egypt or in the European Union doesn't really matter. All the companies can benefit from this regulation. It is not a requirement to be an EU-based company. Another objective was to achieve lower prices by offering longer periods to recoup the investment. That is a bit of an odd thinking, that by giving a monopoly you would get lower prices. I've hardly ever seen that, but that was a serious consideration with expanding the supplementary protection of patents. And the third, of course, which is the one that we hear the most, is it stimulates the research and development. Now, the orphan drugs legislation has led to more medicines with orphan drug designation, but the vast majority of orphan diseases, rare diseases, remain without a treatment. So there are questions about the efficiency of that regulation as well. The same is the case with the supplementary protection certificate, which one study concluded that it offers very adequate compensation for the rights holders, but whether it is an incentivizing measure for research and development is much less clear. So, in summary, lots of perks for large pharmaceutical companies, but the societal gains of that are not at all clear. So, in the years to come, we're going to see discussions at the European level. We're going to see proposals for changes to these regulations, and hopefully some of this will be revised and perhaps be made more efficient. We have a number of recommendations, and those are my last few slides. My clock has disappeared, so I'm not entirely sure how I'm doing for time, but if I'm running over, please do let me know. So here are some of the conclusions that we have drawn, and I should perhaps say at this point that what I'm presenting here today is based on a series of studies that we published. They're all available on our website, and there is obviously a lot more information in those studies than I can give you here in a lecture. But this is the summary of the conclusions. Of course, adequate incentives for research and development are important, but there must be a clearer link between the risk and reward. In the current EU incentive mechanism, whether you actually have taken a risk or whether you actually have invested a lot in the R&D or not, is not relevant in order to get the reward, and we feel that there needs to be a clearer link. The historical reasons that are underpinning some of the EU's general data and market exclusivity system, which were rooted in the fact that the patent systems throughout the EU were very different when this legislation was drawn up, and it was drawn up partially to sort of harmonize that a bit, but that, of course, has disappeared because also patent law has been harmonized since then. So the reasons for that are no longer there. Another a good reason for the review. We would like to see the idea of sufficient profit as a guiding principle, where you actually have a sufficiency principle, which needs to be driven, of course, by transparency of cost and pricing, something that is not really happening yet, but a great deal of discussion is taking place. The flexibilities inherent in patent law should not be rendered ineffective by exclusive rights granted through the medicines regulatory system, as we see today happens with data and market exclusivity, for example. Free trade agreements should not be used to demand third countries to implement more stringent IP protection than they are required to do under the rules of the World Trade Organization. We also think that there should be a much greater diversity in incentives, and that we need to move away from the one-size-fits-all approach, which is very much based on market monopolies. Now, this requires much broader discussion than the proposals that I'm making here today, but we should actually have a debate, and that should possibly take place at the international level, whether we shouldn't have a more diversity, different ways of incentivizing. And I anticipate that what is happening now with COVID-19 might help to stimulate such a debate, because no one said, when in January it became clear that we were going to be dealing with a pandemic and that desperately new medicines, treatments and vaccines were necessary, no one said, oh, we have this generous intellectual property system, we're just going to sit back and wait until the system delivers these medicines and vaccines. No, governments jumped at the issue and started to provide vast amounts of money. They started to fund the research and development directly and did not wait for the IP system to kick in. And there are lessons to be learned from that, including that they should have attached some conditions to that funding, which they didn't do or didn't do sufficiently. But that is a whole different lecture. But I do think that we will see some lessons learned from COVID-19 that may also be relevant in the broader issue of how to incentivize pharmaceutical research and development. Now, the proposals for change will help to rebalance the current system towards serving the public interest. That was very much the policymakers' objective when in 2016 they proposed this review of the European pharmaceutical incentive mechanism. There's a call to have a more balanced system whereby the public interest becomes and public health interest becomes a more central theme. One of the reasons why that did not happen in the past had to do with the development of the European Union itself, which, when the pharmaceutical legislation was drawn up, the European Commission did not really have competency in the area of health, and these regulations were very much drawn up with the interest of the European pharmaceutical industry as the central focus. And that, of course, leads to different legislation, and when you put the public health interest as the central focus. So that there's a bit of an attempt to rebalance that and revisit that, and it will be very interesting to see in the coming years what will happen with that. But what I always say to other countries who ask what can we learn from the European Union, I would say, well, there's a lot that you should probably not do, because the costs to the healthcare system are astronomical and the benefits cannot be demonstrated. So with that, I hand back over to Julia. I thank you very much for your attention, and there are links in the slides that could possibly be shared with you, where you can download the material in full. Julia, over to you.
Okay, Ellen, thank you very much for the great presentation. I'm sure you gave us a lot to think about and to debate. We have some time now for Q&A. So Alexandre will send us the info, how we should proceed. But I'd like to thank very much, Ellen. It was it's a very rich discuss I think we can have now. So Alexandre, please, could you give us?
Agradecemos a excelente palestra da doutora Ellen Toll e lembramos aqui que a partir de 11 horas passaremos para a sessão de debates e perguntas que poderão ser formuladas pelo chat. Devido ao limite do tempo, faremos uma seleção de perguntas para serem respondidas ao vivo. Lembramos a todos que, para irem para a próxima sessão, basta clicar no botão laranja, onde está escrito voltar para a lista de palestras, posicionado abaixo desta tela, e voltar para a lista de palestras, selecionando sessão de debates Júlia Paranhos. Nos veremos lá em alguns minutos, a partir